Welcome to Between Both Cheeks, the podcast where we talk business, beauty, and butts. We'll be stripping down the aesthetics industry, whether you're here for spicy beauty tips, savvy business advice, or just a little banter. We've got you covered from front to back. So pull up a cheek and get ready to discover what happens between both cheeks.
Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of Between Both Cheeks. I have a special reoccurring guest with me today. I have Ashley Lanna from the award-winning podcast and one of my favorite podcasts, Lullaby, the Fear podcast. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. I love when you say my podcast name. It makes me feel so good.
Well, listen. Oh, and the other thing that I need to mention is our new intro and outro is done by yours truly, Miss Ashley Lanna. Your voice, number one, is incredible. And thank you for doing that for our podcast.
Absolutely. As soon as you asked, I was super flattered. I'm like, of course I'll do it.
Oh my God. I was so excited that you even considered it. I was like, what? She said yes?
It was fun. I enjoyed doing it because you guys have a really upbeat podcast and I wanted to be a part of it. So that's me, guys. Hi.
Yeah. The woman, what is it? The voice, the woman behind the voice. Here she is.
It's me. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm just going to quickly brief this so it makes more sense. I have my own podcast called Lullaby, the Fear podcast, which is a dark psychology, true crime, and history podcast where I completely cover a case from the beginning of the timeline to the end, and then I break it down as to everything that happens progression-wise, and we'll break down and read articles and study textbooks based on the actual clinical diagnosis of the serial killers or criminals that I'm covering.
So we're going to have a very interesting conversation today.
Yes.
We're going to go through what is a psychopath, a sociopath, and narcissistic traits. Can you say, is that right?
You could say narcissistic traits. It's in a kind of an umbrella term, and then it falls into a blurred area of psychopathy.
Okay.
Cluster B personality.
That word has been very, I think, overused lately, kind of in social media. But I love what you do. And in your podcast, there is a lot of this narcissistic traits, personality disorders, sociopaths, psychopaths. And I think what's important is to look at these red flags that are out there in the world that maybe people aren't really talking about.
Yeah, because for those of you who can see on the camera, I like textbooks and I like notes. So I came prepared.
Did it literally say red flags? I can't. You guys.
I came prepared. So
I love this.
As Luba mentioned, narcissism, same with psychopathy and sociopathy, it is something that has been thrown around so much in media that it's almost lost its true meaning. So I wrote down psychopath versus sociopath. The difference is often blurred since both are more pop culture terms for antisocial personality disorder, which is something I talk about on my podcast all the time. So if you listen to Lullaby for your podcast, you're like, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the definition for antisocial personality disorder, according to the National Library of Medicine, is an adult diagnosis characterized by a persistent pattern of disregard for and violation of others' rights beginning in childhood or early adolescence, manipulative for personal gain, lack of empathy, seldomly feel remorse, struggle to develop interpersonal relationships. So it's something that it's a very umbrella term. And then you go into the psychopathy or sociopathy. So I wrote down psychopath behaviors involve charming, charismatic, and manipulation. They're often very poised, which is, for example, Ted Bundy. Why a lot of people, that's why he got away with it, because he was very collected, very poised, just a good businessman, politician. Psychopath 101. And then you have a psychopath. I apologize, a sociopath. So these are more erratic, hot-tempered, volatile criminals. Not all, okay, I have to say this. Not everyone who is diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder will be or become a criminal. There, I said it. Now you can't attack me. So now you're looking at someone like David Berkowitz, who's the son of Sam. He was very erratic, very out of nowhere. He just started going crazy. But what they all have in common are antisocial personality disorders, which leads us into the 3 types. Feel free to stop me, Luba, because I'm on a roll.
No, this is great. This is great. Keep going.
So in my textbook, which is labeled Abnormal Psychology, the Canadian edition, I'm going to flip to this page. It discusses the 3 types of personality disorders. There's cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. But we're going to focus on cluster B. And this is antisocial personality disorder, which is a disregard and frequent violation to the rights of others, as we discussed. And then we move into borderline personality disorder, and then histrionic personality disorder, and then narcissistic personality disorder. So on my podcast, a lot of the people I deal with usually tend to be narcissists to be able to get away with what they do because they don't care about how others feel. It's all about them. So the characteristic features of narcissistic personality disorder are a need for attention, lack of empathy, and grandiosity. The high sense of self, the ego.
The ego. Yeah.
The ego. Something that I did find really interesting when I was reading through this textbook is that more often than not, narcissistic personality disorder will also be combined with histrionic personality disorder. And what histrionic is an excessive emotionality and attention-seeking personality. So they tend to be hypersexual. They tend to need sexual gratification from others because deep down they actually lack that. And then they get the projection and shit.
So cheaters.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Would you say? Right?
I'm
Okay,
not a psychologist.
Okay, I know. We're just kind of going through. Do you believe, like personally, that there is truly a sex addiction with some of these people? Like, I have my own opinion on this. I'm not a doctor. But
I'm not a doctor. I can't state my opinion. I don't believe that all of them are sexually orientated, but I do believe a high percentage of them are. That's what I believe. What do you believe?
I do not believe that there is such thing as a sex addiction. I think it's an excuse.
Oh, like that's an interesting point.
I think about Tiger Woods and that when he came out with that whole statement, like, I have to go to sex rehab and stuff. I was like, no, you're just a fucking pig. You're just a pig. And this is trying to come up with an excuse.
Like, it's almost because I have an addiction, it's how I'm rationalizing it. Is that what you're saying? That's a very interesting way to put it. I can see, definitely there's a lot of people who would utilize that as well, I have an addiction, so it's a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point.
One of the keywords you used for the red flags we were talking about, the first word you used is that they are charming. Yes. And where my brain, and like, to me, this is such a trigger word because anytime I've kind of learned about narcissism, sociopaths, psychopaths, listened to your podcast about it, listen to like what girlfriends have been saying, the first thing that they say is, but he was so charming. Yes. I'm shocked with this behavior because he's so charming. This can't be true because he was so charming. Like, if you hear the word charming, run. Like, that's the first thing that comes into my head. Like, if you guys are out there dating and you're like, oh my God, he's so charming, run.
Just pack up and run. I have how narcissists take control of a person. I wrote down the red flags from the National Health Organization. So I'm not just whipping this out of my ass, you guys. I did my research. Are you ready, Luba?
And when Yes, I just want to talk about one of your podcast episodes. I forget the name of the guy, but the girlfriend or wife was Carla.
Oh, Paul Bernardo.
Carla.
Yeah.
Paul Bernardo.
Fun fact.
He was super charming and got away with police over and over and over. And the police said he was just so charming.
And they said that exact thing. He was so charming, it couldn't be him. And people listening, Paul Bernardo was the Scarborough rapist who had victims actually see his face, describe his face, how he talked, his cadence. They had a drawn-up police sketch that looked just like Paul Bernardo. People were telling the police, this is Paul Bernardo. Paul Bernardo walked into the police station. He made them all laugh. He's like, it couldn't be me. And they're like, you're right. And he literally just walked out every time. Podcast plug. I've done Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka.
Charming.
I cannot stand Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. Just scum of the earth.
Absolutely.
Scum of the earth.
All right. Read me your list.
Okay. Number 1. So this is how narcissists take control. Number 1 is love bombing. The first step is they shower with affection, gifts, attention, and it seems too good to be true and perfect. This is not love, it's manipulation. That's the first one. Number 2, they begin to isolate you from your support system, from friends and from family. This begins with negging, subtle criticism of your family, friends, and discouraging you from spending time with them. Like, yeah, your mother is great, but throw in the but. I don't know why I said mother. I'm not. That was just where I went. Number 3 is gaslighting. They make you doubt yourself. They deny facts. Even when you prove facts to them, they call you crazy, leaving you questioning your own judgment. And this next one is where it starts to get pretty complicated. And it's impossible demands and emotional blackmail. So listening out there, peel your ears because this is about to get juicy. Setting ever-changing expectations that are impossible to meet. When you can't meet these expectations, they begin to guilt trip you and manipulate you, saying, if you loved me, you would, keeping you trapped in a cycle of approval. You constantly feel like you need their approval. And then we move into number 5, which is devaluation. Oh, I hear you taking notes.
I am.
Pen is a going. Devaluation. After the constant criticism, when you try to leave, they say, but I love you. And then they try and reignite that spark of hope within you, which is trying to make you remember the love bombing phase. It's like, oh yeah, at one time it was perfect. So if I stick around longer, then maybe it'll get better. And maybe it is just me. And the more this person that you see through these rose-colored glasses, you start to just hope it could go back to what it was. And for those of you listening, there's nothing wrong with you for feeling that way because you are being manipulated. There's nothing wrong with you. And I think that's something that's really important that people need to. It's easy to be outside of the fishbowl and see what's going on, but unless you are actually the one person in the situation who has that person's experience from the time they were born to the moment you were talking to them, you can't just expect you know what's going on in their head. So if you've experienced any of this, know that there are people who want to help you, people who want to talk to you. And the narcissist, it's their life's passion to make people believe their lies. So I had to say that.
I love that. Thank you for saying that.
You're welcome. And the next one is, this is a big one. It's called triangulation and smear campaigns. So this is bringing others in to control the narrative, making the narcissist feel like a hero and that the narcissist is the victim. And more often than not, this doesn't just suddenly happen. It's a long game. It'll start off with little nagging comments going back to the isolating you from your support system and then progress to, well, now I'm being abused. And it's like a form of projection. Now, flipping the page.
Love this.
Number 7, blaming, shifting, and playing the victim to keep you in the wrong. When confronted, the narcissist will never take accountability, and they will deflect and project and gaslight you. Because no matter what, a narcissist, they lack the ability to see that, and I'm going to say it how the kids say it, you are the problem. They cannot realize, they lack the ability of the brain function. It's a disorder where they can't recognize that they're a narcissist. And so that's why people say, no,
it's like dealing with a child,
Exactly. It's like talking to a wall. Like it's not going anywhere. And so that's why they say the best way to react to a narcissist is to not. Because they need that, they have that grandiosity, that self-righteousness. They want to feel like they're the center of attention, whether it's bad or good. People tend to get more attention from bad. Like when they say all press is good press, is that what they say? Even if it's bad, it's still good, but it's just because it's that attention. Whereas people who have empathy, they feel bad when bad things are said. Whereas narcissists, they want people to feel like shit. They want people to feel bad because it makes them feel better, because more often than not, they're super insecure, which is being hidden with all of the projection. So it's like bullies. If I'm mean to them, then people will see me as strong. And then when it seems like I'm being too mean, if I'm obviously too mean, then I'm the bully. But if I turn it around and make their actions of like the victim or the survivor seem worse than what I'm doing, then I'm the hero. So it's this crazy cycle of who can I manipulate? And it all comes back to the manipulation. And then the next one is leaving does not mean it will stop. If you try to leave, they may threaten you, intimidate you, or promise to change to bring you back. Now, for those of you listening, there is a psychological term for this, and it's called hovering. And it's them realizing they're starting to lose control, and so they're trying to reassert that control. And when you let that back in, the cycle starts over again. The love bombing will start, and everything will seem perfect, and then the cycle just continues. So a narcissist is, it's a cluster B personality disorder. Not all narcissists are awful human beings. Some can taper what they go through, but then there are those that cross that line into complete lack of empathy, and those are the ones that you don't want to be around them. They are toxic. They will drain you and everyone around you. And the people who generally like to be around those people are either very lucky to not care or pretend not to care, or the negativity has kind of started to kind of toxify the group, almost like the picture of the line of matches. For those of you, there's a photo online that's really powerful, and it's a line of matchsticks, and the beginning of the line is on fire, and each one is catching on fire, and then one steps away, and that stops the cycle from continuing. It's very much like that. So to kind of round off everything, there are many people out there who want to help you, and there's nothing wrong with feeling like you need help, because you'll realize there's so many people who are there for you, and it's almost very empowering, and you'll realize how strong you really are. Yeah.
A couple of things that I wanted to talk about is, one of the facts that I looked up is it takes on average 7 times for someone to actually leave someone to fully leave them. It takes a woman 7 times to leave her abuser to actually make that final decision to leave, which I thought was huge. There's been a lot of TV shows lately, and Blake Lively's movie, I think it's not This Is Us. That's totally the wrong movie. I was thinking, what's the one that just came out? Something like that. Now I need to look it up.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it.
And you know what? I saw it. I thought it was very well done, because it shows you the narcissist point of view, and then it shows you her point of view. So it's really wild to see that mesh together on like where their headspace is at and where her headspace is at, and combine that. I think they did a really beautiful job with that, and it made a lot of sense, and I think it brought a lot of awareness to the situation, because I think a lot of people stay in relationships thinking A, it's their fault, B, no one will ever believe me because this person is so great, because to the outside world they project this facade of who they are. And, you know, they are the first ones to do everything for everyone else before they take care of their home or their partner, right? So they look perfect on the outside. So I think people stay in these relationships because who would ever believe me that this is happening, right? Or when people, leave these relationships, one of the first questions is, why did you stay for so long? And that conversation needs to stop and be changed to, why did they do this to you? Because unless you've been in it and live it, and this is, the movie really talks about it, it looks perfect on the outside.
Of course.
Right? So unless you've lived through it, you understand what that attachment is and how difficult it is to leave that situation. Versus, it's so easy to be like, well, why'd you stay so long? And what is it called? There's a word to it. It's like a trauma bond. Like,
yes,
you're so
bond.
traumatized.
That's exactly it.
It actually changes the way that your brain functions. Like, truly changes the way that your brain functions. And you believe that you are the problem. Yep. So I think it's great that we're doing this podcast to raise awareness on the red flags. And then I also just want to talk about abuse is abuse, and it doesn't have to come in a physical form. And I think that is so, in my generation anyways, and even older generation, this is so ingrained in our heads that just because they didn't hit you doesn't mean that it's still a form of abuse. Did I say that right? It's still a form of abuse if they didn't hit you.
Yes, absolutely it is.
Which is it's wild to me, because I think those people stay longer because they don't recognize it as abuse. Well, he hasn't hit me. She hasn't hit me.
Yeah. Because especially within the last, I want to say 10 years, it's a very small window from what I've noticed, is when it's always been assumed that physical abuse is the absolute worst. And it's awful, don't get me wrong. But it starts with emotional abuse. Because they have to build that comfort with you and train you to get to the point where, if I do hit you, it must be you that did something wrong, because why would I hit you if I wasn't hitting you to start, right? So it's the long game, right? And this kind of just came to my head, and it's something that I just kind of want to talk about. If you went on a first date with a guy and he didn't have the power of being a narcissist, having the manipulation, he would just start I'm going to say it. I'm going to flat out say it. He would just start beating the shit out of you. Would you stay? No, of course not. And the reason why is because this person hasn't trained you to come back. So narcissists have that ability to play the long game. And that's where they need the poise. They need the charisma, because once these aggressive behaviors start, and it always starts with mental, that once the physical ones start, everyone's only going to see and recognize the beginning of what they showed. And if they've been only showing that for a long time, the odds of them getting away with physical abuse are really high. But it's the mental abuse that no one really talks about up until probably about the last 10 years. Because now we're getting to a type of generation where mental health is finally being acknowledged, that it's been clinically studied that mental pain formulates into physical pain. So even if someone isn't hitting you, they're still causing you long-term pain. And there might be that fear of, well, something might happen, they might start hitting me. And then you're scared to leave. You're scared of it getting worse. So maybe if you stick around, it'll just magically get better. And so if you look at it from a huge picture, that's why when you go on that first date, they're not going to show you how they are because you're not going to stay. They need to train people. And that's what the magic of being a professional narcissist is. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And I think too, we talked about this offline a little bit before we jumped on. I think especially us as women, we really need to listen to our intuition. We really need to I call it your best friend. You know, I always give this example in my boot camps that I run, like, you go to your best friend and you ask for all sorts of advice, business advice, financial advice, relationship advice, and you always take your best friend's advice. Your best friend is your intuition, and we suppress her all the time. And I guarantee when you think back on moments on like, oh my God, I had this feeling, but, oh my God, my intuition was telling me, but he looked so good on paper, or she seemed like such a great employee. She had such great references. So there's always this feeling that we have, and then it's like our heads can't catch up quickly enough to realize I need to listen. It does not make sense in this moment, but I guarantee you 110% it will make sense in the future. There is not one situation where I chose not to listen to my intuition and it turned out for the better. It's always come back to, oh my God, I didn't like this person when I interviewed them. I had just this feeling they were perfect on paper, but I hired them anyways, and it turned out to be a disaster. Or, you know, personal relationships or financial decisions or business decisions. If your intuition is talking to you, that is your best friend, and listen to her, because I promise you that tells you before your head tells you. And we second guess everything in our heads. Everything.
Like, your body is trained to pick up senses before you even recognize it. So definitely, as Luba said, definitely pay attention to it. I have a little story that kind of taught me the importance of following my gut, if you're interested in hearing.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. When I was in my super early 20s, I decided to start joining the online dating pool. Fun stuff. And I knew that you shouldn't let someone you don't know pick you up at your house. Okay? I knew that. My mom is very, Ashley, stay out of trouble. So from a very young age, I was almost embedded with that little bit of fear. Now, I went through an insecure period where I just was like, well, I want the guy to like me, and I don't have a car. It's okay if he picks me up at my house. Okay, nothing happened, but it was still a dumb idea for those of you listening, okay? Shame on me. Now, where I'm going with this is I went on about 3 or 4 dates in a time period, and I think 3 out of the 4 of them picked me up at my house. But then the 5th guy, he seemed to be the nicest of them all. And I was talking to him online, and I just couldn't believe how nice he was. Like, he didn't have like a little bit of like the dick attitude. Like, there was none of that. And I thought, well, he's really nice. And then when he finally asked me out on a date, and he was the one I was talking to the longest, and then finally he asked me out probably about 3 weeks into our conversation. And then when we were planning to go, he said, do you want me to pick you up at your house? And something in my gut told me no. And I remember thinking, well, this is strange, because he seemed to be like the nicest of all the guys I spoke to. So I was still living with my mom. Hey, shout out. And I went downstairs I went downstairs and I'm like, do you want to come with me on my date? But just almost be like the person with the fake mustaches and the sunglasses and like,
yes.
and the paper.
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know, West Edmonton Mall is, well, not anymore, but it was the biggest mall in the world. And there is a large indoor skating rink. And I told him that I was going to meet him there. So I went into this store with my mom, and she was out by the glass because the front of the store was just big glass windows. And she was pretending to look at sunglasses. And I get a text from this guy, and he says, "Where are you?" "I'm out by the rink." Now, where I am, I'm kind of like able to see the rink, and there's really nobody there. So I'm like, "Well, I don't see you. Where are you?" And he's like, "Well, I'm out here." Okay. I walk out. I'm scanning this area, and I'm like, I don't see this guy. And he turns around. Easily, his photo that was online was easily 15 years younger than how old he was.
No.
Easily. And I just remember the pit of my stomach dropped to my ass. And I felt so sick to my stomach. And then the next thing was, I'm pretty sure I had one of those faces where you can just kind of tell. So the fact that my face was probably in shock, he went in for a physical hug.
No.
Regardless of that. And I kind of did the there with the shoulder pat, there. And as we turned to walk, I looked back in the store to see my mom. And my mom was like, just kind of looking at me like, "Are you good? Are you okay?" And I kind of just gave her this like, "Don't leave the mall." Like, I'm glad I went to a public place. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And this is what's really important. So the moment I seen him, I got that feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it did not go away until later that night. So the entire amount of time I spent with this guy felt like an eternity, but it was probably maybe 10 minutes from the time he turned around to the time I had to call off this date. So all we did was walk from where we were to another store location, and I was like, I don't really feel good. I'm starting to get sick. Like, and I mean this, I was not feeling good. And I'm like, and this was true. I said, I just got out of a relationship and maybe this isn't right. And this was my body telling me something's wrong, but trying to figure out why something's wrong. So I'm trying to let him know I'm uncomfortable, but I actually don't know if it's you or if it's because my body's like, you're not ready for a relationship. All of a sudden, his personality started to change. All of a sudden, he started to say, "Oh, well, what did I do wrong?" I'm like, "Well, I didn't say you did anything wrong." He's like, "Well, I must be doing something wrong if you don't want to be around me." "Well, that's fine. I guess I'll just go home and be alone. Just so you know, I drove 40 minutes to meet you here." Wow. So now the guilt tripping is coming in, right? Yeah. And I'm just like, oh God. Because all the love bombing, all that stuff took place online. So this shift
3 weeks
happened,
prior.
Exactly. So this whole shift happened when I first met him. And the other red flag was we were in public and he was starting to get weird. So I ended up having to sit down, and I sat down, and he sits right fucking on my thigh, like right on me. And this bench is huge. And I remember my body kicking into like instinct things that I've learned from like researching stuff. I remember going, make eye contact with someone in this mall so they know I am uncomfortable. And I looked up and I saw this big bodybuilder dude, great guy. And he was leaning up against the store and he was looking at me, and I did not break eye contact with him, but I kept talking to the guy who was next to me. And I'm like, I'm just really uncomfortable. I feel really sick. I don't know what's going on. I might puke. And then the guy next to me, he doesn't even realize that I'm uncomfortable because he's not trained for that. He doesn't recognize other people's emotions, right?
Lack of empathy.
Exactly. So I'm trying to get this guy to like come over, right? And the guy made eye contact with me, and he ended up coming over and standing behind me near the railing by my bench. And then I'm having my phone out next to me, and I'm starting to try to text my mom, and I keep calling her and calling her and calling her, hoping that
my God.
maybe she'll just answer and hear what's going on, right? If I saw that she answered, I could say, yeah, sport, like I'm sitting outside a Sport Check, and I love the store, and it's not making me feel any better. Something really stupid like that. And this guy is he's trying to isolate me, because he says, well, I can take you out to dinner. And I'm like, well, I'm not hungry. So now he's trying to get me to go sit down someplace. He's trying, not working. And then this is where my body was like, absolutely fucking not. Ashley, get out of here. He goes, well, we can go to the movie theater and we can watch a movie that we know no one's going to be in.
Oh.
Absolutely fucking not. Like, even if this guy wasn't a serial killer or like had no intention of that, I'm fine not ever finding out. Like, I didn't feel it. So people, feel your gut, because finally he ended up leaving. And as he stood up, he was walking backwards and he kept saying, are you sure? Are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And then I apologized. I don't know why the fuck I apologized. I was scared of him, I guess. And then he kept backing up. And then finally he turned around and walked away. And then the guy next to me comes and he sits next to me and he goes, who's coming to pick you up? And he's like, I will sit here until someone comes to pick you up.
Wow.
And then my mom finally answers the damn phone. And she's like, sorry, I was in the shitter. I'm like, Mom.
Oh my God.
But the point of this story is I took a lot from that moment. Like, my gut, it started off with I don't know. And that was before I even met them. So that would have been like seeing them on paper, right?
Yes.
And then,
yes.
Yeah. And then when I met them in person, that gut instinct happened. And then his personality escalated very quickly. And that's where your gut was like, yeah, get the fuck out of Dodge now. So that was my experience. And ever since then, I listened to my gut. And I may not ever know if it's right because I got out of that situation, but I'm glad I did. So
it does. I
listen
guarantee
to your gut. Yeah.
You know, and the other thing with that story that I think about, like you talk about leaning in for the like, kind of shoulder hug with him, allowing him to continue to kind of like sit on your knee. You actually said, like, I don't know why I was so nice to him. This is the problem, I think, with us as women, is we're too scared to say something to look mean or look rude.
Exactly.
Right. And like that narrative also needs to change. My example of that is I picked up dancing this last summer. And I sat down for a break, and some guy asked me to come to dance. And I was like, I'm sitting this one out. I need a break. He came back like half an hour later, and he actually said to me, this is my second time asking you to dance. And it was in that tone. And I remember thinking, like, so? Like, that just because you've asked me once or twice or 3 times or 4 times, I don't need to say yes.
Yeah,
like,
no is an answer.
This is a boundary. But it was like he was actually quite upset. He's like, this is now my second attempt asking you to dance. Are you going to say no? And I was like, yeah, absolutely no. Like it became an it became an expectation.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not, you know, throwing any shade at because the dance community is absolutely amazing. But just as an example of what we put up with as women, because, and I talk about this in my boot camps too, one of the first sounds that we are taught as young girls is,
oh my
be
goodness,
a good girl. Don't be disruptive. What would they think? Don't say anything. That is one of the first sounds that we are taught as young girls.
Be a lady.
Carry that. Yes,
yeah.
We carry that into our adult life, and it doesn't serve us.
Yeah. That's very powerful that you said that.
Right?
Because now that I'm older, I have no fucking problem saying no. And it's because I've reached this point where as long as I never want to get pushed to the point of having to be like direct to the point of being rude, but now I have no issue doing it because I don't want to be manipulated. And if you think I'm a bitch, fantastic. why am I a bitch now? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a mean person. I'm not a malicious person by any means. I'm super empathetic. So if I get to a point where I'm having to be like, get the fuck off me. Like, if you didn't read the heckles going up on my shoulders and you try to pet this dog, I will not be a lady. I mean, I'm not going to go to prison for you, but like, I won't be nice about it. So I'm really happy that you tell people that.
Yeah. And I wish Erin was on this podcast. So Erin is our director of operations, and like, she does not give two fucks. Like, she will, like, people, like, men have come to our tables where we, you know, we're sitting, we're having a meeting, we're very intense, and men will just like show up at our table and they're like, hey girls. And she's like, does it look like you were invited to be here right now? We're having a meeting. Like, Erin's my favorite animal when uninvited men try to come up. That's my favorite animal.
Erin in the wild.
Legit, for sure. So I did find out that movie, It Ends With Us. That's the Blake Lively movie. So I think people should see that if they're questioning what their relationship is like. I think that's something that's really great to watch. There is a what is it called? An episodic show on, I guess it might be on Netflix, I'm not sure. It's called Tell Me Lies.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
And if you want to see narcissism or are questioning if you are in a narcissistic relationship, watch that one. Tell Me Lies. It is wild. And then there's a great book that my therapist actually recommended to me like 10 years ago, and it's called The Body Bears the Burden.
Oh.
And that really talks about like your body's response, like we were talking about earlier, right? Like how your, you know, what'd you say? Like your stomach fell to the pit of your asshole or whatever.
Yeah.
Or like how you just get this like gut feeling, how your intuition is talking to you. The Body Bears the Burden is a great book about that, and listening to ourselves and our intuition, our best friend. I wanted to do this boot camp specifically because last January I said boot camp. I want to do this podcast specifically because last January I was doing a boot camp in Miami. And one of the things I do in the class is I get them to write down their goals. You don't share your goals. I get them to write down 3 goals. And it's for manifestation and for planning. And I always say, like, I'm not going to ask you to share this. And I don't care how crazy this goal is. I want you to write it down. And then I walk around the room and I give them ideas like, you know, do you want to open up your own business? Do you want to make $1 million this year? Do you want to pay yourself a salary? Do you want to bring on an employee? Do you want to get married? Do you want to find a workout buddy? And it just came out of my mouth. And I said, do you want to leave your spouse? Oh, and I kept like walking around the room saying things. And at the end of that class, someone came up to me and they said, because of your speech, I'm leaving my husband. I had chose to leave my husband. And that was just a very, I don't know, there was something in that on like, I triggered something for someone to really sit back and look at what they might be going through personally and what they truly want, but maybe they're afraid to say it to friends or family, but they were able to write it down and tell a stranger.
Yeah.
So similar to what you do and why you do it, to help people look for these red flags. You know, I think you said like, you know, if you can allow people to look at these red flags through your podcast and through the stories and help them make a better decision, then your job is done as a podcaster. Exactly. And that's exactly how I felt in that moment. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who this person is, but they are making a life-altering decision based on a class that I put on.
That's really incredible. Because, yeah, sometimes you really need, well, not everyone, but sometimes what people need is that, like, aha moment, but when it's not asked for, where it's, like, something that's really been on your mind, and then all of a sudden, it's like the world is just like, light bulb and you're like, whoa, maybe I should think of this like that way. So that's really neat. You got to come here and do your little boot camps. I want to get in on that.
I know, right? Okay, so as we wrap up, because of course we went over time, I knew we were going to do that. Tell me your favorite podcast episode with the most narcissistic person in it.
Oh, well, that is Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. If you go straight to narcissism, I immediately think of Paul Bernardo. If you want to go something a little bit more interesting, almost like Jodi Arias was a weird one too, because she's almost like the epitome of like she was just as bad as fucking Paul Bernardo, but Paul Bernardo is picturesque perfect. And this is the thing with antisocial personality disorders, is to be in the cluster B section. Narcissism, more often than not, makes up a good 50 to 60% of serial killers. So almost all my episodes I deal with it. I explain why. I don't just go, well, he's a narcissist. I explain why. But I would say Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, the Ken and Barbie killers, that episode is, I really go into that one.
Yeah.
That's a long one too. I think it's like 2 hours long.
Good. I know.
I sent her by
It's so good. Thank you for joining us. I always love having you on. Thank you again for doing our intro, outro. It is so on point, so on brand.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll have you back on. Again, you guys, please download, like, subscribe, comment to Lullaby, the Fear podcast. It is absolutely amazing. I can honestly say this, Ashley, like I fall asleep listening to your stories on the plane because your voice is so therapeutic. Like I literally have to go back and re-listen to them because your voice is just so incredible. And the production of your podcast is just, it's just absolutely amazing. There's not a question in my mind why it's won awards.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means so much to me. I
speak the truth.
It means a lot because I 100% believe you.
Oh, thank you.
It's just,
thank you.
Yeah, I put a lot of work into the podcast so people leave like they learn something, they take awareness from it. And I spread enough awareness where people have to tell somebody about the episode. Like you have to hear about this because the more people who hear about it, the more the awareness is spread. Like I'm not doing it for the sake of being salacious. I'm not trying to romanticize anybody. Absolutely not. I call a spade. And going through all the details of the case, not skimming over anything, is what helps people see these small little patterns that make up this big picture. It's not just one brushstroke that makes a painting, right? Yeah. And that's why when I do my episodes, I go ham. So if I've done an episode where it's like, well, I've heard the Richard Ramirez case. Yep. You're about to hear everything.
Everything.
Yeah. And if I go into detail about how he murdered someone, it's not to be like, ooh, look at me, I'm being graphic. It's, these are the little things that he did. It's awful and it's out there. But if we stop talking about it, then people forget specifically what he did and then only remember that he killed someone, but take away that he was just so charming. That's all I'm going to remember. And that's why when I go to do this Ted Bundy episode, it's going to take a fucking lot out of me because a lot of people know that Ted Bundy was a serial killer, that he was manipulative, but there are people out there who think he's so sexy. And it's like, I don't think you know exactly what he did to each woman. And it's those little things that he did to each woman that are usually kind of brushed over. And the reason I say it, again, isn't to be like, ooh, look at me saying all this horrific shit. It's because those little things, when they're not spoken about, it gets brushed over. And then people will only remember that Ted Bundy was so charming and he was so attractive. No, he wasn't. He wasn't. And so I put a lot of effort into my podcast to spread awareness about these little red flags. So thank you for acknowledging it and liking the podcast. I appreciate that.
Love it. I love it. I like literally listen to yours and one other one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yay. So my
Diary of a
paying off.
CEO and Lullaby. That's it.
Oh, yay. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.